As the first light of dawn touches a world untouched by time, we begin our journey into the age of stone and silence. The sun rose slowly over the wide plains, painting the sky in soft shades of amber and rose. Dew clung to grass, untouched by any foot but that of roaming animals, and a thin mist drifted lazily above the earth. This was a world without cities, without roads, without the hum of machines, only wind, water, and the steady rhythm of life. Near a small river, a group of early humans stirred from their sleep. They lived in simple shelters made of branches and hides, close enough to the water for drinking and distant enough to stay safe from nightly visitors. They had no written language, no numbers, yet they carried stories, memories, and wisdom in their voices, their history etched not on stone tablets, but in the hearts of the living. As the morning warmth touched their skin, they began to rise, stretching muscles, shaped by walking miles each day. A new day meant new tasks, finding food, watching over children, checking the weather, listening to the earth. Life was not easy, yet it was simple, and in its simplicity lay a quiet peace. Today, like many days, began with gratitude, not spoken, but felt. A small fire crackled to life, sending smoke spiraling into the still morning sky, and with it the promise of another day of survival, learning, and living in harmony with the world.
Morning settles over the land, and with it begins the quiet rhythm of daily survival. As the pale light strengthened, the small community moved into motion. The oldest among them, a woman with silvered hair and eyes that had seen decades of seasons, stepped toward the river first. She carried a rough clay bowl, hand-shaped, its surface smoothed by time and use. Kneeling by the water, she filled it carefully, watching her reflection ripple and blur. Not far behind her, children splashed at the river's edge, chasing the tiny darting fish and laughing softly so as not to disturb the adults who watched alertly for danger. Laughter was precious here. It meant everyone was still alive, still together. A pair of young hunters prepared for their morning journey, selecting spears fashioned from sharpened stone bound to wooden shafts. Their tools were not perfect, yet each bore the mark of time and patience. To make even a single spear took hours of careful shaping, striking, sanding, binding, each weapon a small masterpiece of effort and survival. Meanwhile, a few others gathered dried roots and plants from woven baskets, some meant for eating, others for healing. They knew which leaves soothed fevers, which roots chased away stomach aches, and which berries stained skin for decoration during special gatherings. In the Stone Age, every hand had a purpose. Each person contributed to the pulse of the group, whether hunting, gathering, crafting, or teaching. And as the community prepared for the tasks of the day, the world around them remained quiet and ancient, holding its own secrets beneath the soil and stone. Far from the noise of modern life, survival was measured not in wealth, but in the skills carried in one's hands. The two young hunters set off across the tall grasslands, moving with practiced silence. The earth was soft beneath their feet, still damp from the night's cool air. Though they carried only simple weapons, they carried something far more valuable: knowledge, passed from generation to generation. They knew how to read the land, the bend of crushed grass revealing where animals had passed, the faint scent on the wind hinting at a nearby herd, and the presence of circling birds signaling a carcass or a predator. Nature was their guide, and learning her language was a lifelong task. As they walked, they spoke quietly, not of fear, but of plans. Perhaps they would find antelope today, or smaller game if the herds had moved on. Food was not guaranteed. Hunting was a test of patience as much as strength. Some days brought abundance, others offered nothing but dust and lessons.
A little further away, a stream cut through the open plains. The hunters stopped there, kneeling to drink, letting the cool water refresh them. One of them picked up a smooth stone from the bank, ran a thumb across it, and pocketed it. Perhaps it would be useful later, perhaps it simply felt right to carry. Overhead, the sky stretched endlessly, without walls or boundaries. Out here, every sunrise carried a question, and every sunset an answer. Did we learn enough today? Did we make it one day further? In the Stone Age, survival wasn't certain, but the journey itself was its own profound teacher.
While the hunters moved outward into the wild, life continued thoughtfully and patiently at the riverside camp. Back at the settlement, the morning warmed and filled with gentle movement. The older members of the group gathered together, spreading out animal hides on the ground. On these, they placed pieces of flint, bone, and antler, tools in the making. The air soon filled with the soft, rhythmic tink-tink of stone striking stone as skilled hands chipped away at the raw material, shaping it into blades, scrapers, and arrowheads. A boy sat nearby, watching intently. He wasn't old enough yet to make tools on his own, but his eyes followed every motion. He learned by seeing, listening, and trying small chips of stone himself when allowed. In this world, education was not a separate part of life, it was life itself. Every day was a lesson, every task a chance to grow. A woman spread reeds across her knees, weaving them into a basket. Her fingers moved with quiet grace, looping and tightening each strand until the form took shape. Such skills were essential. Baskets carried berries, roots, and even fire embers from place to place. With no stores and no storage jars, what they wove and created helped them survive another day. Nearby, a mother soothed her baby with soft humming. The child grasped a round stone in chubby fingers, already beginning to explore the world with touch and curiosity. Even the smallest members of the community were connected to the constant movement of life around them. Above all these small tasks lay something larger, the sense of being part of a shared world, one where everyone played a role. The river sang quietly, birds called in the distance, and the camp, though simple, was alive with purpose and harmony.
Every day in the Stone Age unfolded slowly, shaped by sunlight, weather, and the calm pulse of the natural world. As the sun climbed higher, the air grew warmer, carrying the fresh scent of earth and wild grass. Those who remained in the camp shifted their tasks with the changing light. Some began preparing food gathered the day before. Roots were cleaned, herbs bundled, and pieces of dried meat soaked in water to soften. The older woman who had fetched water earlier now knelt by the fire, feeding it small sticks and dried grasses. Smoke curled upward in a lazy trail, and she hummed a low, steady tune, a song older than anyone present could remember. It carried a sense of comfort, a reminder that life had continued this way for many generations. Two young girls sat together, cracking nuts with smooth stones, carefully setting the edible pieces aside and saving the shells for fuel. Their conversation was soft and full of laughter as they shared small stories, things they had seen, things they hoped to do. Childhood in the Stone Age was not free from work, but it was filled with learning and discovery, guided by patience rather than urgency. A little farther away, one of the adults examined animal tracks near the edge of the camp. Kneeling, he ran a hand across the shallow depressions in the soil. He could read them as clearly as others might read a sentence. Boar, a small herd, passing during the night. Such signs shaped decisions about where to hunt and when to move camp. The earth itself was their map, written fresh each day. Amid these quiet chores, the camp felt peaceful. There was no rush, no frantic pace. Life moved at the speed of the seasons, the rhythm of footsteps, and the slow crafting of tools. In their own way, the people here were deeply connected to each other, to the land, and to the unfolding simplicity of another day beneath the open sky.
Across the plains, the hunters follow the ancient language of the land, where every footprint, scent, and whisper of wind becomes a guide. The two young hunters continued their journey across the wilderness, moving with purpose but without haste. In the Stone Age, speed was not the key to survival. Awareness was. They walked silently, every sense open and tuned to the world around them. The tall grass swayed gently, brushing their legs, its soft rustle blending with the distant calls of unseen birds. After some time, they reached a slight rise in the land, a place where low stone outcrops jutted above the grasses. From here, the ground dipped into a shallow valley where animals often came to graze. The hunters crouched low, scanning the landscape with careful eyes. They had no binoculars, no maps, only experience and memory. Every hill, every tree line, every bend in the terrain was part of a mental map passed down through countless generations. Then one of the hunters noticed something subtle. A broken patch of grass flattened in a long line as though something had moved through in the pre-dawn darkness. They followed quietly and soon found more signs. Fresh hoof marks pressed into slightly damp soil. A herd had passed not long ago. The older of the two hunters knelt and touched the tracks lightly, reading the earth as one might read words. He could tell that the animals were small antelope, quick, cautious creatures. If startled, they could vanish into the tall grass faster than a thrown spear could fly. Hunting them was a test of both patience and precision. They pressed on, moving into the valley with the sun now warming their backs and shoulders. Small insects flickered in the sunlight, and the sound of buzzing filled the air. A lizard darted across a patch of stone, disappearing under a slab of rock. Life here never stood still. The land was alive with movement, always shifting but always familiar. As the hunters followed the trail, they passed a cluster of old trees that had survived countless seasons. Their twisted trunks bore signs of lightning strikes and harsh winds, yet they remained strong, offering shade and habitat to birds and small animals. The hunters paused here, resting in the cool shadow for a moment, listening for anything unusual. From somewhere ahead came a faint sound, distant, soft, but unmistakable. The gentle calling cry of antelope. The younger hunter glanced at his companion, excitement rising in his chest, though he kept his emotions hidden behind a mask of calm discipline. In the Stone Age, control was as important as skill. A single reckless move could waste a full day's effort. They moved now with heightened caution, every step deliberate.
The grass was thicker here, its tips brushing their knees. Through the narrow spaces between stalks, they could see glimpses of movement, sleek bodies of antelope grazing, their heads lifting now and then to sniff the wind for danger. The hunters sank low, barely more than shadows in the landscape. They signaled with the smallest of gestures, one raised finger, a tilt of the head, the faintest nod. They did not speak. Speech might mean being heard. Slowly, they circled downwind, getting into a better position. The younger hunter clutched his spear, heart steady, mind calm. He had practiced this moment countless times, but successful hunts were never guaranteed. Antelope were fast, their senses sharp. When both men were in place, the older hunter raised one hand and froze. The signal was clear: wait. Patience was part of the dance. They watched the herd graze, unaware of the danger creeping closer. Then, just as the hunters prepared to strike, something unexpected happened. A flutter of wings erupted from the grass nearby as a startled bird took flight. The antelope tensed instantly, their heads snapping up, eyes wide, ears alert. For a heartbeat, the world held still. And then the wind shifted, carrying human scent toward the herd. The animals bolted, launching into swift, graceful motion. The hunters sprang up, running hard, spears ready, muscles burning, but already the herd was scattering in every direction. The chase was short. Soon the antelope disappeared beyond a ridge, leaving only swaying grass and the fading echo of their hooves. The hunters slowed, breathing deeply, accepting the outcome with no trace of frustration. Failure was not failure here. It was learning. It was part of the balance. They stood quietly, letting the adrenaline fade and the calm return. The older hunter smiled faintly, touching the younger one's shoulder. The land had spoken its answer today, not yet. There would be more opportunities. There always were, for those who listened long enough. And so, under the wide blue sky, with the scent of warm grass and earth around them, the hunters turned and began to follow a different path, still seeking, still learning, still living in harmony with the ancient rhythm of the world.
Back at the riverside camp, the quiet work of daily life unfolds in gentle layers, each task shaping the rhythm of survival. While the hunters were miles away in the open plains, the camp continued its calm, steady motion. The heat of midday settled in, warm but not oppressive, filtered through the leaves of nearby trees. The river glimmered in the sunlight like a living ribbon, offering water, food, and a sense of grounding to the community that depended on it. Near the fire, the older woman began preparing a simple meal. She crushed dried herbs with a smooth, round stone, releasing a fresh, earthy fragrance. Her movements were practiced. The herbs would flavor softened meat, helping the small group stay strong. Cooking in the Stone Age was not about indulgence, but nourishment. Yet even simple meals carried meaning, care, continuity, tradition. A short distance away, a man worked quietly on a large piece of flint, shaping it into a new axe head. Each strike of his smaller hammerstone was precise. Too soft, and the stone would not flake. Too hard, and it might shatter.
It was a craft developed through endless repetition, passed from teacher to learner not through diagrams or instruction manuals, but by demonstration and trust. The boy who had been watching earlier now sat beside him, holding a small spare piece of flint. He tried to mimic the rhythm, tap, 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 but his piece flaked unevenly, leaving rough edges and unpredictable chips. A slight tremor of frustration crossed his face, but the craftsman only smiled softly and demonstrated again, shifting the angle of the stone in the boy's hand. There was no scolding here, no sense of failure. In this world, mastery did not arrive quickly, and no one expected it to. The journey of learning was slow, almost meditative, patience in motion. Nearby, 3 women sat weaving long grasses into mats that would line the inside of shelters. Their fingers moved so quickly it seemed almost like music, soft rustling, steady looping, occasional laughter drifting into the air. One of them paused to adjust her infant child, who slept across her lap, face peaceful, tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythm of deep rest. Beyond the shelters, the riverbank had become a playground. Several children splashed in the shallows, their toes feeling the cool mud below. They ran after small fish, giggled as frogs leapt away from their hands, and filled small baskets with smooth pebbles and shells. Their games were simple, yet through them they learned the world. How water flowed, how animals moved, how tools could be shaped from even the smallest objects. An older man sat near the bank, keeping an eye on them while carving a thin bone tool. His expression was calm, weathered, wise. Every so often, he glanced up to scan the tree line, hearing with the kind of awareness that came from years of experience. His body was resting, but his senses were always working. In the shade of a large tree, 2 other elders sat beside a pile of gathered materials, fur, sinew, and strips of leather. One threaded a sinew string through a polished bone needle, repairing a torn hide cloak. The other sorted pieces of leather by size and thickness. Their conversation was unhurried, full of shared memories. The year the river rose too high and washed the camp downstream. The winter when game was scarce and the group had to journey farther than ever before. The celebrations after successful hunts and births. The laughter shared beneath starlit skies. They were the keepers of stories, ensuring that history survived not on stone walls, but in living memory. As the camp worked, the river continued its constant whisper. Birds hopped among the reeds, dropping feather-light shadows on the water's surface. The wind sighed gently through tall grass. There was no real silence here, only the soft hum of nature and human life woven together. Midday stretched on. No one rushed, no one needed to. Life in the Stone Age was slow, deliberate, anchored in presence. Every movement had intent, every breath was part of something larger. In a world without clocks, patience was the true measure of time.
As the day unfolds, the river becomes a gathering place where the community meets the natural world in balance and respect. By early afternoon, the heat had settled gently across the land, and the river became the heart of the camp's activity. Its water ran shallow and clear this time of year, cool against the skin and rich with life. People drifted toward it not just to drink, but to work, to clean, and to enjoy a moment of quiet refreshment under the open sky. A woman carrying a wooden bowl stepped into the river until the water reached her calves. With careful movements, she rinsed strips of dried meat, letting the current pull away dust and ash from the fire. The water made a soft, swishing sound as she worked, and every so often she paused to watch small silver fish dart between her ankles. She admired how easily they moved, effortless and free. Not far away, 2 young men stood waist-deep in the water, their attention fixed downward. They were fishing not with nets, but with sharpened wooden spears.
Their bodies were still, balanced, their eyes trained on the flicker of fish beneath the surface. To succeed, they needed patience. So much patience that time itself seemed to dissolve. Then, when the moment came, movement had to be swift and sure. One struck, sending a clean splash upward. He emerged with a small river fish, skewered neatly on the point of his spear. He said nothing, but his mouth curved in a satisfied smile. His companion gave a silent nod of approval before returning to his vigil. Even small catches mattered. In the Stone Age, food was food. Every bit helped the group thrive. Nearby, a pair of teenage girls knelt along the muddy bank, scraping wet clay from the river's edge. They filled a woven basket with the soft earth before carrying it back to a flat stone. There, one of the elders would show them how to shape it into small pots and cups, sun-dried and hardened by fire. Clay work was important, not only for cooking, but for storing water and carrying food on long journeys. Upstream, two children splashed in the shallows under the watchful eye of an older sibling. Their laughter drifted across the river's surface, light and musical. They scooped water into hollow shells and pretended to cook imaginary meals, mimicking the adults with surprising accuracy. Even in play, they were rehearsing for the lives they would one day lead. A little farther down the bank, an elder woman sat on a smooth stone, legs crossed, a shallow basket in her lap. From it, she pulled reeds and fibers soaked in the river, now softened and pliable. With calm deliberation, she began weaving them into cord. Thin but strong, perfect for tying tools, binding hides, or stringing a necklace of shells. Her hands worked with the rhythm of memory. She had woven thousands of cords in her life. As she worked, a young boy sat beside her, plucking at the hum of the river with a handmade flute carved from bone. The notes were soft and wandering, like birdsong on a lazy breeze. Music in these times wasn't entertainment, it was reflection, a way of hearing the world and feeling part of it. Across the river, dragonflies skimmed the surface, flashing metallic green and blue in the sunlight. A heron stood motionless on one leg, waiting for its own quiet meal. Nature hunted, worked, rested, and waited alongside the humans, not above or beneath them, but beside them, sharing the same world and the same rhythm. One of the elders lifted his head and scanned the area, a habit every adult carried. Even in peace, vigilance was necessary. The forest beyond the river could hold predators, wolves, large cats, bears. But today, the woods were calm. No broken branches, no sudden scents on the air, just the steady hum of afternoon. As the sun slowly began to tilt westward, the people at the river finished their tasks. Spears gleamed with fresh catches, clay awaited shaping, baskets were full, and laughter lingered in the air like drifting pollen. There was no rush to leave. The river was not only a resource, it was a companion. Its voice had guided them through seasons of plenty and scarcity, always flowing, always giving. It asked nothing in return except respect. And in this world before cities, before noise, before hurry, such respect was freely given. The river, like the people, simply lived.
As the sun drifts toward the horizon, the land shifts its tone, inviting both reflection and preparation for the night to come. The afternoon wore on gently, and the light began to soften, turning the world amber and gold. Long shadows stretched across the camp, and the air grew cooler, touched by a whisper of evening. This transition between day and night was always an important time, a moment when work slowed, senses sharpened, and the community gathered itself before darkness settled.
Children were called back from their games by soft voices and beckoning gestures. They came running, breathless and smiling, skin damp with river water, and hands full of pretty stones or oddly shaped pebbles they had collected. All small treasures in a world without coins or carved ornaments. Their play would soon shift into helping with evening tasks, learning responsibility step by small step. At the center of the camp, one of the larger fires was stoked to life. Twisted branches and dried reeds were laid carefully, and sparks rose with the sound of crackling wood. Fire was precious. It provided warmth, protection, and the means to cook food. It was always watched, fed, and maintained like a living member of the group. Nearby, the hunters had not yet returned, so preparations began for whatever food was already available. Fish were cleaned with flint blades, their scales shining like tiny mirrors in the fading light. Roots were sliced thin to cook quickly, and herbs were sprinkled with careful fingers, delivering tastes learned through generations of quiet experimentation. As tasks continued, a small group of younger adults moved to the riverside to wash. Their hands cupped water, splashing faces and arms, chasing away the heat and dust of the day. Without soap or cloth, the water alone refreshed and renewed. They spoke softly as they worked, sharing stories of the afternoon, someone's child catching their first small fish, a new weaving technique discovered, a memory triggered by a familiar bird song. All seemed calm, their shoulders relaxed, and they returned to the fire. Meanwhile, a small group gathered around a flat stone to begin shaping the clay collected earlier. The girls who had gathered it sat close to the elder potter, watching her movements with attent attention. She dipped her hands in water and formed the clay into smooth balls, then pressed her thumb into the center, slowly widening and shaping the walls of a small cup. She said little. She didn't need to. The clay spoke through the process itself. The girls imitated her, their first attempts uneven but earnest. Each cup, even imperfect, represented growth. Elsewhere, a married couple repaired one of the shelters. The woven door flap had worn thin from weather and time, so fresh leather was stitched to reinforce it. Their movements were synchronized, a reminder that in the Stone Age, partnership was not about words of affection, but about shared labor, shared survival, and shared nights before a shared fire. As evening deepened, the sky changed color, streaked with lavender and dusty rose. Birds circled, calling loudly as they prepared to roost. Insects hummed more boldly now, their tiny wings beating in the cool shade. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf gave a long, mournful howl. The sound was not cause for alarm. It was part of this world, a voice among many. Parents began calling children to sit near the fire. Some carried small carved figures, animals, humans, or abstract shapes made from bone or wood. These carvings held meaning, though that meaning was different from family to family. Some were symbols of luck, some were memories, some were simply beautiful objects, carved in quiet moments. The smell of cooking filled the air. Herbs warming over the fire, roots roasting, fresh fish sizzling. It was not a feast, but it was enough. Enough to nourish, enough to continue. And as the sky darkened slowly, the entire camp eased into a feeling of calm preparation. Night would come soon, but for now, the world still glowed with the last promise of the day. There was work left to do, but no one hurried. Like the river and the wind, the Stone Age people moved in harmony with the world around them, unrushed, observant, and grateful for another peaceful evening in a land as old as time itself.
As dusk settles and the first stars awake in the sky, the Stone Age camp gathers into a shared circle of warmth, food, and story.
The sun slipped behind the rolling hills in the distance, and twilight embraced the land. Deep purples and soft oranges faded into the darkness of coming night. One by one, torches and fires brightened around the camp, tiny suns flickering against the vast canopy of sky. The air cooled, carrying with it the earthy scent of grass and burning wood. The community began to settle into its evening rhythm. Children were called to sit close to the fire, their chatter quieting as food was served. Wooden bowls and carved bone spoons were passed around, and though the meal was modest, fish, roasted roots, and a simple broth flavored with herbs, it tasted rich after a long day of work and exploration. People ate slowly, not because of scarcity, but because evenings were a time for presence. No one rushed. There were no schedules to keep, no distant bells or clocks demanding attention. Nightfall itself was the signal that the day's work was complete and rest had earned its place. As the warmth of the meal spread through the camp, the hunters returned from the plains. They emerged from the darkness of tall grass, carrying no large game, but wearing expressions of steady acceptance. They were greeted not with disappointment, but with quiet nods, understanding smiles, and bowls of food offered by waiting hands. Everyone in the group knew that hunting was unpredictable. Some days provided much, others less. Survival was communal, not a burden carried alone. The younger hunter described the near success and the moment the antelope fled. The older members listened with interest, offering no judgment. Instead, they shared small pieces of wisdom, how a different angle might reduce the chance of wind shifting scent, or how the herd's movement signaled they had sensed birds earlier. Learning was woven into conversation, subtle and respectful. As the meal concluded, the fire's glow grew brighter against the encroaching night. Sparks drifted upward and vanished into the air like fleeting stars. Around the flames, elders and younger members alike gathered in a circle, a nightly ritual as old as memory itself. This was the storytelling hour. A grizzled elder cleared his throat, letting the quiet fall fully into place. His voice was deep and unhurried as he began a tale passed down through countless generations. A story of a time when animals could speak and humans learned to hunt not with weapons first, but with humility and respect. He spoke of a great deer spirit who taught the first hunter that taking life without gratitude would cause the forest to fall silent. He described how fires were once gifts from lightning, how people learned to carry embers across long migrations, and how every tool crafted from bone or stone carried the memory of the creature that provided it. The children listened wide-eyed, leaning forward to hear every word. Some clasped small wooden carvings in their hands, linking the physical world with the one shaped by stories. Adults listened too, not because they did not already know the tale, but because repetition was comfort. In a world without writing, stories were anchors, history, philosophy, and identity, preserved in the breath of those who spoke them. Occasionally, another elder added a detail, or a younger member asked a question. The story shifted slightly with each telling, becoming a living thing that evolved with time. In this way, knowledge was never static. It grew, adapted, and traveled hand to hand, heart to heart. While the story unfolded, someone quietly added more wood to the fire. Flames cracked and hummed, casting dancing shadows on the shelters and the ground. The light illuminated people's faces, some solemn, some thoughtful, some softly smiling. Above, the sky revealed itself fully. Stars emerged in clusters, glittering in deep space. The Milky Way arched overhead, a river of light as constant as the river beside the camp. No one here could name the stars in written symbols, but they knew them through patterns, through seasons, through the instinctive connection built by generations of looking upward. When the elder finished the story, a comfortable silence settled. The crackling fire filled the space between heartbeats. Someone began to hum, a slow melody, low and soothing. Others joined, creating a harmony without words. Music, like memory, needed no instruments to be powerful. One of the mothers gently rocked her sleepy child. The child's eyes fluttered as the voices and firelight blurred together, creating a moment of deep safety and belonging. In this world, childhood meant connection, not to screens or toys, but to people and the earth beneath them. Around the circle, people leaned back, resting hands on warm soil or folded hides. For a while, no one spoke. They didn't need to. The fire spoke. The insects whispered. The night breathed. Some would soon take up the first watch, ensuring the camp's safety until dawn. Others would return to their shelters, crawl beneath woven mats and furs, and drift into sleep with the sound of the river in their dreams. This was life in the Stone Age, simple, grounded, shared. Surrounded by challenge, yes, but also by meaning, ritual, community, and peace. And so the night deepened, and the camp prepared to rest beneath an ancient sky, guided not by clocks or screens, but by flame, story, and the steady heartbeat of the earth.
Night in the Stone Age was a world of quiet mystery, where the land spoke in sounds and shadows, and every heartbeat waited for dawn. As the last murmurs around the fire faded, the camp shifted into its nighttime rhythm. People moved to their shelters, some alone, others curled together as families beneath hides and woven grass mats. A mother pulled a fur blanket over two sleeping children, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's brow before settling in herself. The baby beside her made a soft sigh and nestled closer, the warmth of shared closeness holding back the chill of evening. Outside, the world grew darker, fuller. The stars gleamed with ancient clarity, uncountable, bright, and impossibly distant. In the Stone Age, the sky was not a backdrop, it was a living map. Each constellation carried memory. Some marked the changing seasons. Others told stories of hunts, love, loss, and the lessons of the spirits who watched over the world. A pair of adults took the first watch, as was custom. They sat near the fire, spears within reach, eyes and ears tuned to every sound beyond the circle of light. Their silhouettes flickered against the stone and shelter walls as the flames twisted and rose. One of them, a man with broad shoulders and a scar across his jaw, gazed toward the tree line where darkness seemed to pool between the trunks. He listened, not for danger alone, but for the everyday voices of the land. Crickets sang. A distant owl hooted once, twice, then fell silent. Frogs croaked softly near the water's edge. None of these sounds caused alarm. They were life's normal music, notes that reassured more than threatened. Every so often, one watcher walked the perimeter, stepping lightly, avoiding snapping twigs or rustling grass. His body moved with practiced ease, balance born from years spent in the open. In a world without walls, vigilance was not fear, it was responsibility. Meanwhile, in the shelters, people slept in comfortable layers of silence and soft breathing. Some dreamed of the day just lived, of weaving reeds, of children's laughter, of fish darting through sunlit water. Others dreamed of hunts, of moments when adrenaline surged and the world narrowed into the fine balance between life and learning. In one shelter near the river's edge, the young boy who had struggled earlier with his flint work slept with his half-shaped stone tucked beside him. His small fingers curled around it, his dreams filled with the sound of tapping stone and the satisfaction of one day shaping something strong and true. Even in rest, the child was learning. His mind practiced, imagined, and prepared. Another shelter held a gathering of elders, who often slept close together as they shared warmth and felt safer that way. One of them, the storyteller from earlier, lay awake a while longer, staring up at the small slice of sky visible through the cracks in the roof. He traced familiar constellations in his mind: the stalking lynx, the cradle of stone, the river goddess with her flowing hair. He smiled faintly. These stars had guided travelers long before he was born and would shine long after he was gone. Near the fire circle, the watchers spoke quietly, sharing low conversation to stay alert. They discussed recent hunts, weather patterns, and small shifts in the land.
evidence of animals moving through new paths or changes in plant growth. Their talk was practical, but beneath it lay something deeper, a sense of shared guardianship, of standing together against the unknown that lay just beyond the glow of the flames. A soft breeze rolled across the camp, fluttering the edges of shelters and carrying the smell of earth and wildflowers. On its current rode another scent, faint but real. The watchers straightened slightly, noses lifting. It was the musky smell of fur, an animal, though not too close. After a moment of listening, one watcher relaxed again, likely a deer making its nighttime rounds, or perhaps a small boar rooting through the underbrush. The forest always moved at night. Life never slept entirely. Far from camp, a wolf howled again. This time the sound came from the opposite direction, answered by another. To the watchers, this was reassurance. Wolves communicated among themselves, often signaling territory or calling to the pack. A hunting pack might pose danger, but lone howls usually meant the animals were far and occupied with their own lives. The fire crackled softly, embers shifting as wood settled. Sparks drifted upward, flaring briefly before disappearing among the stars. The watchers added another log, careful not to make a loud noise. Fire served as both boundary and beacon. Most predators feared flame. Few would willingly approach. Hours passed in steady quiet. The moon moved slowly overhead, painting the ground with pale silver. The camp rested, safe, silent, breathing as one. Finally, the second watch arrived, relieving the first with gentle nods and whisper-soft footsteps. Those who had stayed awake stretched stiffness from their limbs and climbed into shelters, ready for sleep. The new watchers settled in, eyes sharp, ears open. And so the night continued, balanced between rest and awareness, spirit and earth, dream and waking. In the Stone Age, darkness was not something to fear. It was simply another part of the world, a time of renewal and ancient stillness, where the land spoke softly and humanity listened in the language of firelight and stars. Morning would come soon enough, but for now, under the endless sky, the camp slept in the arms of night.
With the first light of dawn, the Stone Age world awakened, not hurried, but in a rhythm as steady and ancient as the earth itself. Dawn arrived slowly, in layers of silver and rose that painted the sky above the distant treetops. The fire had burned low through the night, leaving a bed of warm amber coals. The watchers of the last shift stirred the ashes gently, coaxing flame back to life before someone brought fresh wood to strengthen it. A touch of smoke drifted upward, carrying the scent of the coming day. One by one, the camp woke. A few children were the first to emerge, blinking at the light, hair mussed and limbs heavy from sleep. Their small feet padded across the cool ground as they stretched and yawned. One boy, taller than the rest, tried to imitate a hunter's confident stride, though his gait ended in a slight wobble. His younger sister giggled, but followed him just the same. Childhood in this age was a mixture of freedom and observation. They learned by watching, by copying, by trying, and sometimes falling. From another shelter stepped a woman carrying a woven basket of dried roots and early berries. She set them beside the fire and began preparing a simple morning meal. Cooking in the Stone Age required patience, starting with crushing roots on a flat stone, mixing powders with water, heating with hot stones pulled directly from the fire. The woman worked methodically, her movements smooth and practiced. Nearby, the boy who had dreamed of flint napping stirred sleepily and emerged holding his unfinished tool. The stone still bore only the earliest signs of shaping, but he clutched it like treasure. He sat near the fire and waited for heat to loosen the morning chill from his fingers before trying again. His father noticed from across the camp and gave a small nod. Not praise, but respect. In their world, learning was not encouraged with words, but through acknowledgement and opportunity. A short distance away, two hunters returned from a very early scouting round. They carried no game, but they brought information. Footprints of deer near the marsh, fresh signs of wild boar to the north, and broken branches hinting that larger animals had moved through in the night. Their knowledge was as valuable as meat. A successful hunt began long before a spear was thrown. The leader of the group, a strong woman with braids threaded with bits of shell, listened carefully as she warmed her hands over the fire. Decisions about where and when to hunt were never casual. A misjudgment could mean wasted effort or danger. She closed her eyes briefly, building a map in her thoughts, weighing risks and rewards. Then she spoke softly, just loud enough for the gathered hunters to hear. They would move south today, toward the lowland where reed beds grew thick. Deer often passed through there in the morning, from the forest into open grazing lands. If they were quiet and moved with care, they might return with enough meat to feed everyone for several days. As plans formed, the camp settled into a steady stream of morning tasks. A group of women and youths prepared carrying baskets woven from reeds and grasses. They would gather plants, seeds, and fruits, steady sources of food that balanced the unpredictability of hunting. The Stone Age was not only the age of spears, but the age of baskets, digging sticks, and knowledge of the land's teachings. The elders gathered slightly apart. A few sat near the fire, rubbing stiff joints and wrapping furs around their shoulders. Others stood and performed simple morning stretches, following movements passed down through memory, meant to keep bodies limber in a world where every motion mattered. One elder, whose hair had gone white with years, used a carved walking stick to trace lines in the dirt while children watched with curiosity. He spoke of the way the sun moved across the sky and how shadows told the time. Not a clock, but a rhythm deeply understood. When food from the fire was ready, warm mash flavored with crushed berries, the group ate in comfortable silence or with soft conversation. A toddler mashed food all over their face, and the mother laughed, wiping the child's mouth with a strip of hide dipped in clean water. Even the wolves' distant presence was noted, but not feared. Someone had seen tracks earlier, far enough away, not fresh. Predators and humans shared the land cautiously, each aware of each other's space. Harmony was not constant, but conflict was not the rule. After breakfast, the hunters prepared for their journey. They checked spears one by one, sharpened stone heads carefully tied with sinew, straight shafts polished from endless handling. A young man tested the flexibility of his new spear thrower, a carved tool that would give his hunts greater range and power. He exhaled proudly when it passed the final test. Today, he would use it in a real hunt for the first time. Before leaving, a small ritual was performed, not grand or formal, but deeply rooted. A handful of herbs were placed in the fire, releasing a thin thread of fragrant smoke. No words were necessary. The meaning was shared. Gratitude to the land, a wish for safety, a request for balance. One of the elders touched each hunter lightly on the shoulder in a gesture of blessing, not command, but connection. In the Stone Age, the strength of the group depended not on rules, but on bonds. As the hunters moved off, disappearing into the trees, the others began their own daily paths. Some remained to repair shelters, make tools, or watch the very young. Others walked toward the river to fill gourds with water or gather reeds and clay. Work was constant, but not rushed. People sang while grinding grains, hummed while setting snares, whistled softly while weaving baskets. And through it all, the morning sun climbed slowly, warming the earth, drying the dew, and casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the lagoon and the forest floor. The day had begun, not with urgency, but with purpose. Life in this age was neither easy nor cruel. It was attentive, steady, and deeply felt. Every sunrise brought new chances to learn, shape, create, and provide. And those chances were taken with the quiet understanding shared by all. They were part of the land, and the land was part of them.
As the sun climbed higher, the Stone Age world settled into the rhythm of daily labor, patient, deliberate, and deeply connected to the living earth. While the hunters moved deeper into the southern lowlands, the rest of the camp began their own tasks, each person contributing to the delicate balance that sustained the group. Children, too young to join the adults on long treks, were given small responsibilities. Some helped gather dry grass for bedding. Others collected smooth pebbles from the riverbank, perfect for grinding grains or polishing tools. They worked with wide eyes and playful gestures, their attention drifting from work to darting insects, interesting leaves, or the cool water splashing around their ankles. Near the center of camp, an older girl and her younger brother sat beside a large, flat stone. The girl held a smooth, hand-sized tool and rhythmically ground wild seeds into flour. The younger boy handed her small handfuls of cleaned seeds, proud of his role. Occasionally, she paused to brush bits of dust from the rock with her palm. The resulting flour was precious, not just food, but a sign of knowledge passed down unbroken through generations. Closer to the water, a small team of women worked on creating new baskets. They sat in a semicircle under the shade of broad trees, the air cool and fragrant. Their fingers moved with grace, weaving reeds over and under in tight, consistent patterns. The baskets would serve many purposes: carrying food, storing tools, even lining shallow earth ovens. As they worked, they talked softly about the signs they had seen that morning: the growth of young reeds earlier in the year than expected, the departure of certain birds indicating a shift in season. To them, nature was a calendar, a teacher, a guide. Farther away, two youths walked along the marsh collecting useful plants. They carried digging sticks and small woven bags at their sides. The marsh was alive with activity. Dragonflies hovered over the water, frogs croaked in steady rhythm, and reeds swayed gently in the breeze. The air smelled of mud and spring. They spoke occasionally, mostly in short observations. Fresh shoots here. Careful, soft ground. Footprints. Deer. Their voices remained quiet, respectful of the space. The land did not need to be filled with words. Not far from camp, an older woman led a group of young adolescents to a large flat rock used for tool making. She carried with her several pieces of raw flint in shades of gray and blue. With deliberate slowness, she knelt and placed the first stone before her. The students gathered in a half moon around her, eyes sharp and eager. She picked up a hammerstone and tapped lightly, demonstrating how to strike with careful control, never rushed, never random. A flake popped off cleanly, revealing a sharp, glassy edge. The onlookers murmured in appreciation. Each student then selected a raw stone and began to practice. The clearing filled with the soft, rhythmic clacking of stone on stone. The elder walked among them, adjusting a grip here, correcting an angle there. The teaching was wordless, more often than not. She showed by doing, and the young ones learned by trying. The boy who had worked on his flint the previous day struggled at first. His hands shook slightly, afraid to chip too much or too little. But after several attempts, a thin flake snapped off neatly, his face lit with pride. The elder gave him a rare smile, a silent but powerful encouragement. Meanwhile, a small group tended to shelter repairs. Wind and rain had loosened sections of reed roofing, and they reinforced the structures with new binding cords made from twisted plant fibers. They patched old holes and replaced broken poles. The shelters were not permanent houses, but resilient, evolving spaces, adapted to the land and rebuilt whenever necessary. At the riverbank, another group worked clay into small bowls that would dry in the sun. Their hands shaped the soft earth patiently, turning lumps into forms both functional and beautiful. Some bowls bore carved patterns, spirals, dots, or lines inspired by river currents and ripples. Each pattern meant something, sometimes just personal expression, sometimes a sign indicating who had made it. Laughter occasionally broke the quiet concentration of the camp. One child slipped in the mud while chasing a bird and sat up splattered, surprised but unharmed. Another elder shook his head with amusement and helped the youngster back to their feet, offering a playful nudge and a piece of berry to ease the embarrassment. Even animals passed nearby without fear. A pair of cranes landed a short distance away, heads bobbing as they pecked gently for insects in the grass. People glanced at them, but did not disturb them. In this age, humans and animals shared space with unspoken respect. Both alert, both aware, neither wasteful nor careless. By midday, the sun hung high, warm but not harsh. The lagoon glittered, shimmering like polished metal. A few people paused from their work to drink cool water or rest in the shade. Yet the day was not about rushing. It was about steady progress, the kind of patient effort that built skills, homes, tools, and memory. Every task, every motion was done with purpose. And though life in the Stone Age was demanding, it was not without quiet contentment. People laughed, taught, learned, and created. They contributed to something larger than themselves. A community tied not by walls or written rules, but by the rhythms of work, nature, and the knowledge that survival was a shared achievement. Together, they shaped the world around them, and the world, in return, shaped them.
As midday settled across the land, those who gathered plants and herbs worked with quiet care, guided by knowledge older than memory. While the hunters tracked game far to the south, a small group of gatherers moved into the shaded forest beyond the river. The air here was cooler, hanging heavy with the scent of damp earth, moss, and greenery. Sunlight filtered through the branches in soft, shifting patterns, dappling the forest floor in gold and emerald. At the front of the group walked an older woman known for her deep knowledge of plants. She carried a curved digging stick and wore a pouch filled with seeds, dried leaves, and fragments of roots, both emergency medicine and teaching samples. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning the ground, tree bark, the spaces between stones. Every inch of the forest was full of meaning to her. Behind her walked several younger women and 2 adolescents, apprentices in the craft of foraging. They watched with focus, stepping where she stepped, learning to read the landscape not with words, but with observation. The elder stopped and gestured toward a cluster of broad-leafed plants growing beside a fallen log. She knelt, touched one leaf gently, and spoke in a low, calm voice. "This heals fever when boiled." She broke off a small piece, letting everyone smell it. Sharp, bitter, unforgettable. One apprentice nodded, storing the knowledge away. She placed a few leaves in her gathering basket, careful not to take more than the patch could recover. This was a lesson repeated often. Harvest, but never strip the earth. The land gave, but it must remain able to give again. They moved on, and soon the elder paused at another plant, tiny white flowers growing among knee-high grasses.
"Do not touch this one," she warned gently. "Good for wolves, bad for us." The group stepped back. The elder did not fear poisonous plants. She respected them. Every living thing had work in the world. The role of humans was not to destroy, but to understand. Nearby, a young apprentice spotted a plant with small purple berries and hesitated. She pointed at it, unsure. The elder smiled and shook her head. "That one we eat only when winter is close. Stronger medicine then." In this world, memory was stored not on stone tablets, but in minds, passed through demonstration, stories, and the patience of repetition. Knowledge traveled mouth to ear, hand to hand, season to season. At a shallow stream, the group stopped to rest. They cupped water in their hands and drank. A pair of frogs splashed away at their approach, disappearing under the mossy stones. One apprentice knelt beside the water and studied her reflection. A young woman on the path to mastery, though she knew it might take years. She felt pride and a hint of responsibility. The elder watched her with a knowing expression. She remembered being young herself, forming questions, building understanding, beginning a lifelong conversation with the land. She tapped her staff lightly on the ground, signaling it was time to continue. The forest changed subtly as they went deeper. The scent shifted, more pine and dried leaves. Birdsong grew fainter, replaced by the faint knocking of a woodpecker and the soft whispering of trees swaying overhead. They passed the bones of an old fallen pine, half rotten and full of life. Fungi, beetles, and ants carving away at what had once stood tall. Nothing here ended without feeding something else. The elder stopped again, this time kneeling beside a cluster of tall, thin plants with fuzzy seed heads swaying in the breeze. "We will need these later," she said. She harvested several stems and handed them out. These fibers would later be twisted into rope or cord, essential for tying spear points, making fishing nets, and building shelters. Even the smallest plant here served purpose. A short distance away, another apprentice called softly, pointing toward a low shrub heavy with ripe red berries. The elder approached, inspected the shrub carefully, and nodded in approval. "Good, well spotted," she said. The group set to work, gently plucking berries and dropping them into baskets. Some berries would be eaten fresh with the evening meal. Others would be dried in the sun, becoming food that could last weeks. A few were crushed with a stone to make pigment, color for marking tools, decorating bodies, and telling stories on hide or wood. Under a large tree, the elders showed them how to dig for edible roots without damaging the new offshoots. The ground here was rich, the roots thick with stored nutrients. When they uncovered one, the smell of fresh soil filled the air. The apprentice who dug it up carefully recovered the smaller roots still growing. The elder nodded her approval again. Good harvesting was not simply gathering, but tending. Even without fields, humans played a quiet role in shaping the land, ensuring plants would return season after season. As the group worked, they talked, not chattering, but speaking in low, thoughtful tones. They shared memories of past seasons, a drought year when berries were scarce, a flood when new edible plants had sprung up in unexpected places. They spoke of times when healing herbs had saved a sick child, and days when the land taught lessons through scarcity. At one point, the wind shifted suddenly, bringing with it the distant sound of geese flying overhead. The gatherers paused and looked upward, watching the birds cross the sky in graceful formation. It was a sign. Migration had begun. The season would soon turn again. Eventually, the baskets were filled. Roots, leaves, seeds, berries,
fibers, and mushrooms, gathered with care and understanding. Each item meant work ahead: drying, grinding, storing, sorting, and using wisely. The forest offered abundance, but abundance always required effort. As they returned toward camp, the sunlight slanted through the trees, creating a path of warm gold. The elder walked slowly at the front, her steps sure and unhurried. Behind her, the apprentices followed, each one carrying not just food and materials, but new knowledge, new skills, new threads in the ancient tapestry of survival. They would not remember this day as a single event, but as part of a lifelong learning, a small piece of a story that stretched back thousands of years and would continue long after they were gone. In the Stone Age, gathering was not just work. It was understanding the world deeply enough to live within it, not against it, not above it, but as a part of its patient and eternal rhythm.
As the days stretched onward, the hunters moved silently through the tall grasses, their senses tuned to the land, every step part of a ritual older than memory. Far from camp, the hunting party entered the southern lowlands, a landscape shaped by marshy ground, tall reeds, scattered trees, and winding animal trails. The air here was different, thicker, warmer, heavy with a sense of wet earth and wild plants crushed under careful feet. Insects buzzed softly, and distant birds called in warning or greeting. Their voices told as much about the world as any tracks on the ground. Leading the group was the woman with braided hair threaded in shell beads, the acknowledged chief hunter. Her eyes swept the ground and horizon constantly, reading details others might overlook. A bent blade of grass, a hoofprint pressed deep, a tuft of fur caught on bark. Her presence was calm but focused. Every movement she made was deliberate, the result of years spent walking the land. Behind her came 4 others, 2 seasoned hunters and 2 younger initiates, each carrying a spear and a stone knife. One of the younger hunters, a boy barely on the edge of adulthood, held his new spear thrower tightly. This would be his first major hunt, where his success or failure would matter. He tried to still his breathing. He had practiced for months, yet practice never carried the weight of the real moment. His chest felt tight, but he kept his fear hidden behind a steady expression. He knew the land, the tools, the motions. The elders would not have brought him if he wasn't ready. The hunters paused at the edge of a stand of low trees. The leader knelt, brushing aside loose soil to examine something only she had noticed. A fresh track. It was deep, the edges sharp, meaning it had been made recently. She pressed her fingers into the impression and lifted them to her nose. Deer. Several, and moving south. The group exchanged silent glances. They were close now. As they continued forward, the reeds around them rustled lightly in the breeze. Small insects flickered upward, disturbed by passing steps. The seasoned hunters moved like shadows, low to the ground, careful not to snap a twig or rustle a bush. Their knowledge was not theoretical. It was embodied in muscle memory, instinct, and 1,000 hunts that had come before. The young man with the spear thrower watched the elders closely, trying to mimic their gait. Each footstep was placed in a hollow or soft ground. Each shift of weight was silent. He felt sweat forming on the back of his neck, not from heat, but from anticipation. They stopped again near a muddy bank, where a cluster of footprints led toward a stand of shorter reeds. Several prints overlapped. There must have been at least 3 or 4 deer, possibly more. The leader rubbed her thumb against the track's inner edge. Moist, the animals were not far. She signaled with her hand, no words necessary. 2 hunters broke right, moving wide in a flanking arc. The others stayed straight, lowering into a crouch that allowed them to disappear into the green ribbon of reeds. Minutes passed in steady, quiet motion. At last, through a break in the vegetation, they saw them. A small herd of red deer, grazing near a shallow pool. 2 adults and 2 yearlings. One adult, a doe with a strong body and wide-set eyes, lifted her head and sniffed the air. She sensed something, but had not yet identified danger. The young hunter felt his pulse drumming in his ears. His hands trembled slightly. The spear felt too heavy and too light at all once. The leader lowered herself and waited. Patience was a hunter's greatest weapon. Rushing would mean failure and disrespect. Stone Age hunting was never about domination. It was a negotiation between human needs and the life of another creature, carried out with precision and reverence. When the flanking hunters reached their positions, the leader flicked 2 fingers. Go. In perfect silence, the hunters rose into throwing stance. The young man lifted his spear and placed it carefully into the wooden spear thrower, adjusting for balance. He took 1 long breath, then another. The deer moved suddenly, sniffing again. Their ears twitched. The leader threw first. Her spear sailed cleanly, powered by practiced strength and perfect angle. It struck the large doe with a solid impact. The animal reared, muscles contracting, eyes wide with shock. The others released their spears in near unison. One struck a yearling cleanly, another missed and landed harmlessly in the grasses. The young man's spear left his hand with more force than accuracy. He felt it the moment he released, not angled quite right. It struck the deer, but too low, wounding without killing. The herd bolted. Chaos surged. The young hunter's heart crashed in his chest. The wounded doe stumbled, bleeding, as the hunters gave chase. The leader signaled for him to follow her, and he sprinted through the reeds, legs pumping, breath burning in his throat. The ground was uneven, but he kept his footing. The doe collapsed moments later beside a fallen tree. She breathed heavily, unable to flee further. The leader approached slowly, placing her hand briefly on the animal's side. She whispered, a quiet acknowledgement of the life being taken, a gesture older than language itself. She finished the task swiftly, ensuring the animal did not suffer longer than necessary. The young hunter stood nearby, chest heaving, overwhelmed by the rush of reality. He felt pride and something heavier, understanding. This was no small thing. Taking a life required skill, respect, and emotional strength. It was food, but also responsibility. The leader turned to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. She said nothing, but her expression spoke plainly. You did your part. You will learn more. The hunters worked quickly. Using sharp stone knives, they performed the butchering with practiced speed. Nothing was wasted. Meat was carved into long strips for carrying. The hide would become clothing or shelter lining. The bones would become tools. Even tendons would be cleaned and used as strong binding. A young hunter, feeling his earlier mistake, offered to carry extra weight. The others accepted with a nod. Learning meant carrying burdens, sometimes literally. By the time the sun began to dip, the hunters had gathered all they could. The lowland breeze shifted, carrying the smell of water and distant pine forests. Birds returned to their evening calls, filling the air with a settling calm. Exhausted but satisfied, the hunters shouldered their loads and began the journey back to camp. They walked with slow, steady steps, injuries wrapped and spirits balanced. The young hunter looked at the sky, awash in warm afternoon colors, and felt something new settle inside him. Not pride alone, but belonging. He had taken part in the sacred exchange that sustained them all. And though he still had far to go, he now understood a truth spoken without words. Life in the Stone Age was not about conquering the world. It was about knowing one's place within it.
While the hunters made their long return, the camp welcomed the slow heartbeat of afternoon, a time of work, rest, and the quiet weaving of community life. In the heart of the settlement, the sun now hung high and warm. Shadows shortened, insects hummed more lazily, and the lagoon sparkled with midday reflection. The camp moved at a gentler pace during this time, neither still nor rushed, but balanced in its own rhythm. Several children played near the water's edge, their laughter bright like birdsong. They chased small fish with sticks, splashing knee-deep in the cool shallows. One boy managed to trap a darting fish between two stones, triumphant as he lifted it high. The older children clapped, some cheering, others teasing him that he had been outsmarted by a creature smaller than his hand. They were learning without realizing it. These playful games would one day teach the patience and observation needed for real fishing. Not far away, a mother showed her young daughter how to braid wet reeds into rope. The girl's small fingers fumbled at first, the strands slipping apart again and again. But the mother simply repeated the motion slowly, letting her daughter mirror her hands until the first successful twist formed. When the child finally managed a strong, neat braid, she beamed with pride, as if she had accomplished something monumental. And in truth, she had. Every skill learned strengthened the whole group. At the shelter area, two men worked on shaping long poles for future construction. They rubbed rough shafts against stone to smooth them, turning raw branches into polished structural supports. They spoke little, working in a companionable silence, broken only by the rasp of wood and the whisper of wind. Occasionally, one paused to stretch his back, then resumed with the steady determination of someone who understood that shelter was not just a convenience, it was survival. Nearby, the elder with the carved walking stick sat beneath a shade tree, surrounded by several young children. He spoke in a low, rhythmic voice, telling them a story not meant for excitement, but for memory. He drew lines in the dirt with his stick, illustrating as he spoke. "This star here," he said, pointing to a dot in the earth, "rises when the herds grow fat, and this one signals the great rains." The children leaned close, their eyes wide. Star lore was not just myth, it was a calendar, a way to predict the world without clocks or paper. One girl, curious and bold, asked, "How did the first people learn this?" The elder smiled with patient wisdom. "By watching, always watching." Farther from the center of camp, two women sorted and prepared the day's gathered plants. They laid edible roots on flat stones to dry in the sun, tied medicinal leaves in bundles to hang from simple wooden racks, and placed berries in carved bowls to mash or ferment later. Their hands moved steadily and their conversation flowed gently, about weather, about the upcoming winter, about a child who had grown taller since last season. One of them paused, feeling the smoothness of a polished stone bead in her palm. It had been part of a necklace worn by her mother, and now she carried it as a reminder and a blessing. Even in this practical age, small talismans held meaning. People needed both food and symbols, physical sustenance and emotional anchors. At the tool-making site, the apprentices continued their work under the elder craftswoman's guidance. The boy who had succeeded earlier now attempted to refine the edge of his flint tool. His blows were more confident, his posture straighter. He focused intently, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth in deep concentration. Not every flake landed perfectly, but he was learning, slowly, steadily, with the rhythm of stone on stone echoing across the clearing. The elder watched him with a mixture of seriousness and pride. She remembered that the continuity of their people depended not on numbers, but on the transfer of knowledge. If this boy learned well, he would someday teach another. The chain would remain unbroken. Some members of the camp took this warm hour as a chance to rest. A couple of adults lay on furs in shaded shelters, conserving energy. In the Stone Age, rest was not laziness,
It was as vital as work. A tired hunter, a distracted weaver, or an unfocused toolmaker could cost the group dearly. So rest was taken as seriously as effort. One mother lulled a baby to sleep with a soft humming melody older than words. The child's eyelids fluttered, then closed fully, small fingers still clutching the edge of her fur blanket. The woman looked down at the infant with a quiet tenderness that transcended eras. Love was as ancient as stone. As the afternoon drifted on, a young lookout, stationed on a small rise near the camp's edge, stopped sharpening his stick and sat up straighter. His eyes narrowed. Movement. Not danger. Familiar figures approaching through the reeds in the distance. He smiled and stood, shading his eyes with one hand. The hunters were returning. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out a signal cry, clear and ringing. People began to rise from their work. Some shaded their own eyes. Others paused with expectant smiles. Mothers called their children closer. The toolmaker dusted stone chips from her knees and stood. The hunters' silhouettes grew clearer. Slow step, heavy loads, and the confident posture of success. Before they were close enough to speak, the camp already knew. Meat was brought home. Even before celebration, even before the details of the hunt were shared, everyone understood what this meant. The work of survival was shared again. The cycle, hunt, gather, craft, teach, rest, was as steady as the beating of their hearts. And in this moment, as the afternoon light warmed the village and the hunters crossed the threshold back into the fold, there was a feeling that belonged entirely to their age and yet to all humanity. A simple, profound relief. We have enough.
As the hunters entered the settlement, their return shifted the afternoon's calm into a hum of movement, an ancient choreography of welcome, gratitude, and work shared. 3 hunters emerged fully from the reeds, each carrying the weight of the day's success. The lead hunter balanced the heavy legs of the deer across his shoulders, its hooves swaying gently with every step. Another bore a bundle of smaller game, rabbits and birds, tied by rawhide strips. The third carried the long spear he had used, its point darkened from the kill. Their faces showed exhaustion and triumph in equal measure. Sweat shone on their brows, dust clung to their legs, but the pride in their posture was unmistakable. They had done their duty, and they had done it well. Children ran to meet them first, their feet kicking up dust. They launched a barrage of excited questions. Was it big? Did you chase it far? Who struck it first? Did you see wolves again? The hunters laughed breathlessly and waved them off. Answers would come soon enough. For now, they needed to present their catch properly. At the center of the settlement, several of the elders and skilled workers stepped forward to greet them. There was no formal ceremony, no ritual feast yet, but there was a moment of silent respect. The hunters laid their burdens on a flat skin spread on the ground, and for a heartbeat, everyone stood still. A hunt was never guaranteed. A return was never promised. Life in this time was built on risk, skill, and the goodwill of nature. And so even the simple deer was worthy of acknowledgement. The oldest woman in the clan placed one hand lightly on the animal's body, an unspoken gesture of thanks, not to a god, not necessarily to a spirit, but to the animal itself and to the world that continued to provide. Then the camp moved into action. 2 women fetched stone knives and bone scrapers. The butchering began immediately. Waiting too long in the sun could spoil valuable meat. The hunters sat on low stones while others brought them water and freshly gathered berries to eat. The lead hunter took a long drink, wiped his beard with the back of his hand, and finally began to recount the hunt. A ring of children and adolescents gathered around, eager.
"We tracked the deer from the high ridge," he said, gesturing with a hand that still trembled slightly from fatigue. "The ground was dry. It left good marks, but it was fast. It crossed the ravine before we could take a shot." He traced the shape of the slope in the air, his movements sharpening as he relived the moment. "We used the wind, came from the side. When it stopped to drink, we slapped the haft of our spear. We struck." One of the boys, the apprentice flint knapper from earlier, leaned forward, eyes wide. "Did it fall right away?" "No," the hunter replied, shaking his head. "A strong one. We followed its blood trail another half-mile. Always finish the hunt. Never assume the end before it comes." A lesson, a warning, a truth that every young listener absorbed. Nearby, the women butchering the deer worked with practiced efficiency. They removed the hide first, one pulling it taut, while the other sliced clean lines separating fur from flesh. The hide would later be softened and turned into clothing, bedding rolls, or leather ties. The meat was divided into sections, the best cuts for immediate cooking and sharing, others to be dried or smoked for leaner days, organs set aside for those who needed strength or healing, bones for tools, marrow, and broth, sinew for thread strong enough to bind spears and fix tools. Nothing would be wasted, not even the hooves, which could be boiled into a useful glue. A few paces away, two men began gathering firewood for the evening meal. Smoke rose early from the fire pit as dry grass and small twigs caught flame beneath larger sticks. The distinct scent of cooking smoke drifted slowly across the settlement, and stomachs growled in anticipation. The elder storyteller, still surrounded by younger children, tapped his walking stick on the ground. He told them, "Listen, every hunt teaches two things: what the hunters learned and what the camp must remember." The smallest girl frowned thoughtfully. "What must we remember?" He smiled. "We eat today because someone risked their life. One day, others will eat because of you." The children nodded solemnly. This was not dramatizing. It was how their world worked. As the sun moved lower in the sky, the pace quickened slightly. Those tasked with preserving the meat prepared racks for drying, stretching strips across wood frames to catch the falling light and gentle breeze. The smell of raw meat mixing with the smoke of the cooking fires gave the camp a distinct and primal aroma, the smell of survival. The hunters finally stood again, stretching out stiff shoulders and backs. Though they were weary, they joined in the work. They helped hang meat, drove stakes into the ground, and carried heavy cuts to the fires. Here, there was no concept of your job or my job. There was only our survival. Even the youngest helped in small ways. One boy fetched clean water. A girl brought armfuls of herbs for seasoning and preservation. A toddler held a stone bowl that someone would soon fill with marrow or fat. In the midst of this purposeful activity, laughter sparked here and there, shared memories of the hunt, playful teasing, promises of stories to be told by the fire once the day's labor ended. As the sun dipped toward late afternoon, the rich smell of roasting meat filled the settlement, and voices lifted with the warmth of accomplishment. The hunters were home, the camp was fed, and the balance, once again, was restored. And tonight, under a sky full of stars older than memory, stories would be told about the deer that ran far, the skill that finally brought it down, and the people who worked together, in each their way, to turn the day's challenge into tomorrow's strength.
With food secured and fires burning low, the settlement turned to the evening's next rhythm: craft, care, and the small tasks that held life together day by day. As the last of the meat was hung to dry and the aroma of roasting venison blended with the earthy scent of smoke, the camp gradually shifted from the intensity of the hunt's aftermath into a calmer phase of late afternoon. The shadows grew longer across the packed ground. Birds settled into their nests. The river's murmur grew louder as the rest of the world relaxed. Many in the community now turned their attention to the tasks that rarely paused, even on days filled with excitement. Women sat together on woven reed mats, working the deer hide that had only hours ago covered the animal. They scraped the inner surface with curved stone tools, patiently removing membranes and softening the skin. One hummed a steady tune, and the others joined quietly, not as a performance, but as a shared rhythm that made the work lighter. Nearby, two younger girls twisted wet sinew fibers into thread, their fingers moving in smooth, circular motions. The older of the pair guided the younger. Not too tight or it'll snap. Feel it breathe. The younger girl nodded, concentrating fiercely. On the other side of the camp, one of the elders sat with a boy who watched him carve a bone into a needle. It was slow, meticulous work. Each scrape of flint had to be precise, every angle deliberate. As he worked, the elder spoke, not in a lecture, but a quiet stream of thought. Tools survive us. Most of us won't be remembered in stories for long, but something you make may pass forward. Someone will use it, someone will learn from it. That's a good life. The boy absorbed every word, filing it away like a tiny tool in his growing understanding. A little ways off, the apprentice flint knapper worked under the watchful eye of the toolmaker from earlier. This time the apprentice was striking a new core of flint with slightly more confidence. Chips flew in sharp, glittering fragments, catching the fading sunlight. The master nodded once, silent approval. Others tended the fire, turning the roasting meat or brushing it lightly with herbs crushed between fingers. The sound of sizzling fat hitting hot stone made several stomachs rumble. Still others focused on the water containers, tightening weave bindings, sealing small leaks with pine resin, and fetching new cool water from the river. Even the elderly, who moved slowly and with care, contributed by reshaping dried reeds into baskets or checking the sharpness of tools. No hands were idle unless they needed rest. Life here was work, but work was life. It connected each person to the others and to the earth beneath them. And yet, despite the constant tasks, the atmosphere was peaceful. No complaining, no rushing, only focus, purpose, and a simple satisfaction that came from knowing that each action mattered. As the sun dipped even lower, a father and his young son stepped into a quiet patch of open space near the river. The father held a small spear, child-sized, with a dull tip. He placed it in his hands and guided him gently. Feet strong, breath steady, listen before you move. The boy lifted the spear and focused on a small target, an old log propped upright. He threw, and the spear landed short, bouncing weakly off the ground. The father smiled. Good. Try again. Not good job because the throw was perfect, but good because he tried. That was how skill slowly became ritual, and ritual became instinct. In another area, two teenage girls practiced tracking. One walked a zigzag line through the dust, leaving footprints. The other followed, studying each mark: heel depth, direction, speed. They switched roles every few minutes, exchanging observations with growing confidence. The world was their teacher, and they learned by doing. Further beyond, at the edge of the settlement, the group's healer examined plants laid out on a flat slab of stone. Leaves, roots, berries, dried fungi, each with a purpose. And young apprentice hovered nearby as the healer explained which eased stomach pains, which cleaned wounds, and which must never be eaten raw. The knowledge spoken here had no written form. It lived in memory, in practice, in life itself. Everywhere in the settlement, small skills were being polished. The hunters sharpened new spear points. The hide workers checked seams. The children gathered strips of bark to dry for fire starting later. If someone tired, they rested. If someone needed help, hands appeared.
If someone finished early, they drifted to join another task. It was a web of unspoken cooperation. And over it all, the evening sky darkened into a gentle blue streaked with gold and violet. The first night insects began their songs. Smoke rose into the air in thin lines, and the heat of the day finally began to fade from the earth. As the sun touched the horizon, the camp paused, not completely, but in subtle ways. People looked up from their work, taking in the beauty of the day's last light. Some smiled, some simply breathed, some said a quiet word of thanks to life, to the hunt, to the land. The moment didn't need to be spoken. In this age, survival wasn't only about hunting or fire or shelter, it was also about these countless moments. Hands teaching hands, minds learning from mistakes, skills sharpening slowly like stone against stone. As the dusk settled, the settlement felt warm, unified, and deeply alive, each person contributing to the tapestry of a life both fragile and timeless. Soon, the final meal of the evening would be shared. Soon, stories would rise again with the stars. But for now, in the last red glow of the sinking sun, the camp worked together in harmony, quiet, focused, and deeply connected to the world around them.
Night settled once more across the ancient land, and with full bellies and tired bodies, the clan gathered for an evening of stories, songs, and the soft weaving of memories into tradition. As the final glow of sunset slipped behind the horizon, the village transitioned into its nighttime rhythm. Fires were fed with fresh wood, their flames rising and casting warm light across the settlement. Sparks drifted upward, disappearing into the expanding tapestry of stars that brightened with every passing minute. People finished the last of their tasks, hides stretched, water containers sealed, tools laid carefully beside sleeping areas. The day's labors were complete. The hunt had provided, the meat was drying, and the camp could finally turn its focus from survival to something just as important: connection. One by one, individuals and small families moved toward the main fire, the largest hearth in the settlement. The flames roared softly, the sound of crackling wood filling the spaces between footsteps and quiet voices. Children found their favorite spots, some sitting cross-legged, others leaning sleepily against older siblings or parents. A few young men were still helping turn portions of the meat over flat, hot stones. The smell was rich and comforting, promising a satisfying meal. When the first finished cuts were carried to the circle on wooden platters, they were shared evenly, not based on who hunted or who worked, but simply on who was there. Each person took a piece, murmuring small thanks. Soon bowls were filled, hands warmed by steam, and the gentle chatter of contentment rose around the fire. After everyone had eaten their fill, the oldest elder, his face lit in deep amber hues, rose slowly to his feet. Conversations quieted without being asked. Even the children stilled. This was the moment the day always moved toward: the telling of stories. He spoke in a strong but unhurried voice, the rhythm of one who had practiced storytelling all his life. Before we hunted with stone, we hunted with only our hands. A few eyebrows lifted. The younger listeners leaned forward. In the time of our ancestors' ancestors, there were no spears, no blades, no bows, only courage, patience, and the willingness to learn from the world. He described a time when early humans watched predators, big cats, wolves, and hyenas, and learned from them. When people studied the wind, the cracks of branches under their feet, the behavior of grazing animals, and the shifting shadows of evening. We did not begin as the strongest, he said. But we listened, and in listening, we grew smarter, faster, better. Every generation in this settlement had heard variations of this story before, but hearing it again after a successful hunt gave it weight. It connected the past to the present, the ancestors to those still learning. The elders spoke of a legendary first hunt, when a single human tracked a wounded deer for 3 whole days, never losing focus, never giving up, until finally the animal slowed and the hunter made the kill. "He did not celebrate alone," he said, looking around the circle. "He returned to his people, and they shared the meat. And from that day on, the hunt was never a task for one person, but a gift for all." A few young hunters exchanged proud glances, the parallels between the legend and their own day not lost on them. After the elder's story, another voice entered the night. A middle-aged woman began to sing. Her voice was low and warm at first, like embers glowing under ash. Then slowly, others joined in, older women, young men, children humming with small but earnest voices. The song wasn't about words, it was about sound, a rising, falling river of tones that blended with the crackle of fire and the chorus of nighttime insects. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. Someone tapped a hollowed log rhythmically. Others clapped in gentle patterns. The community wove music together without instruments, notation, or rehearsal, only instinct and tradition guiding them. When the song faded, the energy shifted again. A younger storyteller, one barely into adulthood, began his own tale, one full of humor. He reenacted a scene from a previous hunt when he had slipped in river mud and fallen face first just as a startled fish jumped and hit him on the head. The camp roared with laughter, tears forming in their eyes. Even the stoic elders smiled. In the Stone Age, laughter was not a rare luxury, but a necessity. It kept spirits light, strengthened bonds, and reminded everyone that life held joy even in difficult times. After the humor settled, the circle drifted into quieter conversations. A mother told her children about the constellation patterns overhead. That line is the great hunter. That curve is the running deer. And those 3 small stars are the 3 young hunters learning to follow. The children stared upward, their imaginations weaving new worlds among the lights. Not far away, lovers whispered softly, speaking dreams of the future. The apprentices shared excitement about what they would attempt tomorrow. A girl gently stroked the fur of a well-fed camp dog who lay stretched and content beside the fire. Little by little, the younger ones began to fall asleep, heads resting on knees, laps, and furs. Parents lifted them quietly and carried them to their shelters. The fire burned lower. The songs grew softer. Stories tapered off into gentle murmurs. Soon, the stars dominated the sky, glittering with a clarity that modern eyes seldom see. The Milky Way shone like a pale river, stretching from horizon to horizon. Before turning in for the night, one of the hunters rose, shouldered his spear, and walked to the edge of the settlement to begin the first night watch. Another would relieve him later, and another after that. Even in peace, vigilance never rested. But his steps were relaxed. The world tonight felt safe and balanced. The elder looked once more at the glowing coals, nodded in satisfaction, and returned to his shelter. Another day in the camp had ended, with work, with laughter, with learning, with gratitude. In the flickering fire's last light, it was easy to see. Though the Stone Age was harsh, it was also full of warmth, family, tradition, and the kind of peace that comes from living close to the earth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and new stories. But for now, beneath the eternal stars, the settlement slept, together, connected, and deeply alive.
As dawn rose once more over the ancient land, the Stone Age settlement welcomed a new day, a reminder that life, though simple and rugged, moved forward in quiet cycles of work, learning, and continuity. The first shafts of pale light touched the sky, slowly dissolving the darkness. The stars faded one by one, and the Milky Way, so bright just hours before, softened into the pale wash of morning. A faint breeze stirred the grass, carrying the cool scent of dew and river mist into the still sleeping camp. The guard on night watch shifted his weight, stretching tired arms as the birds began their chorus. Cranes, river finches, and night herons called into the dawn, announcing the changing of world and hour. The watcher turned toward the settlement and smiled to himself. The night had been quiet. No predators, no storms, no threats. A good sign. Soon the camp began to stir. Small fires were restoked with dried grass and twig bundles. Smoke curled upward in thin blue lines as embers brightened again. Slowly the shelters rustled, first children waking, then adults rising behind them. There were no shouted alarms, no urgent commands. People awoke as the world did, softly, naturally, to the promise of a new day. Mothers stretched furs neatly along the ground. Older children fetched cool water from the river in leather containers, their bare feet splashing in the shallows. A few dogs padded around, sniffing for dropped bits of dinner from the night before. The hunters gathered near the fire pit, checking their weapons with practiced hands. Spear points were inspected for cracks, shafts were gently flexed to test strength. A few men ran fingers along bowstrings made from sinew, ensuring they had not loosened in the night air. But there was no rush to return to the plains. The large hunt yesterday meant today could be lighter, perhaps gathering fruit, checking traps, or reinforcing shelters before the next storm season arrived. Around the main fire, a simple breakfast took shape. Roasted roots were reheated. A small pot of ground seeds mixed with water simmered gently. A bit of dried meat was shared. Hunger was not a strong presence today. The clan felt well fed, fortunate. One of the elder women stood and faced the camp, her voice soft but carrying. Yesterday we thanked the hunt. Today we thank the work that follows. No ceremony, no rigid ritual, just acknowledgement. Everyone nodded, understanding the meaning. In this world, gratitude was not something spoken once, but lived, day to day. Children sat together eating, kicking their feet as they talked in low voices. Some reenacted the moment the deer was struck, holding sticks as imaginary spears and dramatizing heroic lunges. Their laughter drifted through the cool morning air. A group of women carried the nearly finished deer hide to the riverbank. There they washed and stretched it once more, preparing it for its final treatment. The hide would make a cloak, or maybe a blanket that would warm a newborn through winter. In this time, nothing was wasted, and every finished craft carried meaning. Nearby, the flint knapper and his apprentice continued their lesson from the day before. The younger boy struck more confidently now. His shards chipped smaller, more precise. The master nodded once in approval. Progress was measured not in finished tools, but in each small improvement of the hand. At the far edge of the settlement, two young girls walked with woven baskets toward a grove of berry bushes. Their chatter floated like birdsong, light, unburdened. One day they would carry deeper responsibilities, but for now the world allowed them innocence wrapped in gentleness. The healer sorted herbs in the shade of a tree. Some were bundled to dry, others were crushed into paste with a stone pestle. A young apprentice recorded the healer's teachings by memory alone, because memory was the only library the village owned.
A few men reinforced shelter walls with fresh branches and clay. The walls, though simple, were sturdy and warm. When completed, each would be smoothed with flat stones, the fingerprints of their makers remaining in the clay like small signatures left to the future. Throughout all of this, the world around them thrummed with life. Birds taking wing, insects warming with the sunlight, the river speaking continuously as it had since long before people walked its banks. Finally, the eldest man stood and looked over the camp, his voice calm and thoughtful. "Young ones," he said to a cluster of children, "remember this. Our lives are not only in the hunting, the building, the tools. Our lives are here." He tapped his chest. "And here." He gestured to the camp, to the people. "Stone breaks, wood rots, but what we teach each other lasts." The children grew serious, absorbing the words. Lessons here were never given in classrooms. They were sown in hearts, handed from one generation to the next, with the quiet patience of the land. And so the morning flowed into day, the camp warmed by firelight, sunlight, and human presence. No one here thought of themselves as trapped in a primitive age. They were simply living, the only way life could be lived in their time. Close to the earth, close to one another, and never far from the lessons carried in each dawn. By midday, the hunters set out toward the plains, tools strapped across their shoulders. The craftspersons kept shaping bone and stone. The children continued exploring, learning, playing. Life would go on, just as it had the day before and would tomorrow. And though time would move forward, and centuries later the world would change beyond all imagining, a piece of this village, its laughter, its wisdom, its fires, would continue in every descendant who learned, struggled, hoped, shared, survived, and lived. The Stone Age was harsh, yes, but it was also full of peace, community, rhythm, and meaning. A life not measured in possessions, but in connection. As the elder once said, "What we teach each other lasts."